Okay, today I have the great pleasure of getting to speak to Martin Russ. Martin Russ is an author, magazine writer, blogger, a music tech guy. He's got his fingers in all of it, like so many of us do. And it's really a pleasure to get to meet with him. I actually just ran across him. We were at a retreat, and so everybody was chipping in to help out with some support. Someone said, hey, could you take a look at this support issue? It was Martin's work for his blog, and I was so fascinated. I was like, this is one of my guys. I got to talk to him. We started up a conversation, and thus the interview. So with that, I'm going to talk to Martin. Hey, Martin, how's it going?
It's going fine, thanks.
Thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat. This is really cool to have you on.
No problem.
To begin with, why don't we have you talk a little bit about some of your work? I think for people who just do a quick search, what they'll see is that you're most known for a book called Sound Synthesis and Sampling, but you've kind of done a lot of different things over the years. So why don't you just fill us in a little bit on your body of work?
Okay. Sneaky is actually the right word, because for a long while I did ghostwriting. So I ghost wrote columns in magazines where I pretended to be teams of people and do all sorts of interesting comment on the way that the music business works and et cetera, which was great fun. And it's especially good fun when you get journalists going to the magazines and saying, can I talk to the team? And et cetera, because they wanted to give them a particularly juicy piece of information, et cetera, et cetera. So I've done that. I also did loads and loads of reviews, and reviews are interesting because there's a couple of ways of doing reviews. There's the one that is the worst possible one, which is the one where you try and live off doing reviews, and that's hard, and it's a lot of work, and etc. I didn't do that. What I did was I did reviews as if I was an engineer reviewing the item in question, and so I'm afraid I'm the guy that actually pulled stuff apart, looked at the circuit boards, had a look at the chips they were using, looked at the data sheets for those, etc., etc. And at least one Japanese manufacturer actually requested of magazines that they didn't send items to me for review because they didn't want people opening their stuff up and looking inside. But sometimes I've had quite interesting reputations, and of course there's lots of interesting things that you find when you start looking, and you've got an eye that says, "Hang on a minute, this isn't exactly as you'd expect," etc., etc. Because I've always had the sort of mind where if people say you can't do that, then I'll bang against that door until I can find a way of doing it. And if something hasn't got a feature that you want, you think, well, there must be a way of adding it, or etc. The recent example of that would be the OWL pedal from Rebel Technology, right, where it's got the standard guitar effects pedal foot switch on it, and it's also got another little momentary action switch on the top. And the trouble with that is that you can't touch that with your feet, because it's a tiny little thing that's really designed for changing the programs that you're running on the pedal. Right. And so I thought, well, no, this actually needs to be another foot pedal. And so I looked at the information that there was on the effects pedal, and of course it's open hardware, so they basically tell you everything about it. And so I designed a single transistor inverter, hooked it into the circuit, put an extra jack socket onto the pedal, and lo and behold, I've now got an OWL pedal that has an extra jack socket that lets you put a foot switch onto it, and that foot switch effectively is in parallel with the special programmer switch, but it means you can use it inside your user interface, and it means you can program that, and so you have a foot switch where there was never intended to be a foot switch. So yes, I'm afraid that I'm
You're
very
that
much.
guy.
I'm the dangerous guy who when people say you can't do that, etc. And of course, the reason I did that was because the intended application there was a let's go secrets again. A name producer asked me to do an application to run on that owl pedal, and in order to do that, I needed this extra switch, and so. That's why I did it. And so, yes, it's a way of solving a problem. So,
Sure.
yes, I solve problems by not necessarily going by the correct route.
Right. Reading beyond the manual in a way, right?
Yeah. Yes, manuals are interesting, but it's like with data sheets. I was always intrigued by data sheets where people say, but it says on the data sheet that it does this. A data sheet is always something that you verify. A data sheet is something that has gone through a whole series of editing and various bits and pieces where management have said, no, we're not going to say that, and etc. And so, data sheets are completely correct as far as they go, but they may well have errors and they may not tell you the whole thing. And so the whole story is often much more complicated than that. And so yes, verify and see what you can find, because there's always, well, not always, but almost always, there's something interesting if you push something. What's it? Finagle's law, isn't it? If you push something hard enough, it will fall over.
Now, talking about ripping things apart and digging into them, another place people may have found your work and your efforts is in your development of Macs for Live devices. You have some of the more significant and highly downloaded devices over on MacsForLive.com.
I've also got a device that no one has ever downloaded. Believe it or not, there's a DLS drum sound tester that the last time I looked, no one at all had downloaded. So that's the opposite. So I never thought of myself as a person who generates lots of downloads, because my stuff tends to be obscure and slightly unusual. But I'm happy to be corrected. But yes, I do also hold one of the interesting things of the exact opposite. I've got a device that hasn't been downloaded. But yes, carry on.
Well, that's kind of interesting because so like the way I looked for your work is I typed Russ, R-U-S-S, in the thing, and I got your stuff. But anyway, you've done a bunch of really cool Macs for Live devices, which a lot of them are tied to sort of like musical twists and variability, especially with a lot of probability. But the other thing that I like is that you have a blog called Synthesizer Writer. It's blog.synthesizerwriter.com, where you kind of take the work that you've been doing on these devices and you rip it down and you explain it almost like object by object throughout your thing. Now, note for people who aren't super familiar with Macs, you're going to be like, oh crap. If you are super familiar with Macs, you're going to be like, oh yeah. So, just as an example, if I read the first sentence from one of the articles here, it's like, here's a surprise entry from the rapid gestation pipeline, a hex frequency shifter that is totally intended to mangle spectra. Okay, with that as a subject line, there's a group of people that are just going to be like, what? Where do I go? It's very interesting, and I love the fact that you not only have the device, but you have these like deep teardowns of how you got there. What made you decide to put that kind of effort into it?
It's two things. The first thing is that I hate manuals where they're very superficial and they give you just the surface gloss and et cetera, et cetera. So one of the Macs for Live devices that I downloaded was a very, very sophisticated monosynth with FM and all sorts of things built into a very unconventional structure. And the problem I had with it was that there were various user interface objects that it wasn't at all obvious how you use them. And so eventually I managed to figure out how to use them. And I thought, well, the manual doesn't say anything about this, so I wrote an alternative manual that explained how all of these user interface objects worked. And I also programmed 200 and odd voices for it as well. And so I sent these to the people who actually had produced the thing in the first place. Right. And they made it available for other people to download. And so my first thing is that there's an awful lot of stuff on Macs for Live where there's a very short bit of introduction and information about it, or there's a little bit of information, but there's very rarely is there deep, interesting, and sort of technical information. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to release devices, then I ought to do something that is much more interesting and much more relevant to people who are, after all, if you go to macsforlive.com, you're one of two sets of people. You're either someone who's programming Macs for Live, or you're someone who's going to use Macs for Live devices, and you may well get pulled into programming. Right. And so for both of those, I think you need more information than just the here's how to install it, tweak a few knobs and see what happens, because I really don't like things like that. And over time, it's gradually evolved into stuff where I say more about how things work. So recently, for instance, I did it's a bit like the Yet Another C compiler thing. So I did the Yet Another Scale utility. So I did Scale utility, and rather than concentrate on the Scale utility, what I did was I gave away the spreadsheet for download, which shows how you encode all of the scales and how you can use that to produce the mapping table that you use to actually do the mapping. So you have a 128 by 128 table instead of the conventional approach where you just map an octave. Right. And so instead of actually concentrating there on the details, I actually concentrated on the details of how the heck do you manipulate a spreadsheet so you can get useful mapping tables out of the complicated and dense information that you find if you look up various scales in a music theory book. So same thing, but an interesting diversion. It's something I really don't like the standard ways of doing things. So not only do I find ways around things that stuff won't do, I also like to do the unusual and a different angle. So I'm a different angle man.
Clearly so. Now, that makes me immediately want to jump to sort of one of the standards of my podcast, which is to find out a little bit about the background of the people that I'm talking to. In your case, what is it that brought about the different angle guy, but not only a different angle from a curiosity standpoint, but also with the skills in music and in, being able to play around with the electronics part of things, clearly being able to handle the coding things. You have a lot of different skills that you bring to this level of curiosity. I'm curious where this comes from.
Okay, it's an interesting question. I'm your sort of Renaissance man of the modern era. My background, it's quite a long while ago. I was born in the year that the transistor was invented. And so, yes, if you care to look that up, you'll be, intrigued. I spent my childhood playing around with tape recorders, with radios, and other bits of electromechanical and electronic stuff, old TVs, old gramophones, old radiograms, all of those sort of things, a lot of it valve stuff, and basically just learning by doing. And so I was playing around with tape loops and changing the size of capstans on tape machines and doing all sorts of interesting things just so that I could play with sound. That led to doing lots of electronics. So I did... Well, in fact, my first synthesizer was a modular synth that was using unijunction oscillators as the replacement for VCOs. So I had no money, and so if you use a unijunction transistor, you can make a very simple sawtooth oscillator just by fastening a capacitor and a resistor across the appropriate parts of the unijunction.
Sure.
And when you then put current through it, it just sits there, charges up, and occasionally when it gets the right voltage level, it will discharge the capacitor and start again. And so you can actually chain these. So you can put one of those in series with another one, run them at different frequencies, and because it's the current that determines how quickly the unijunction oscillator runs, then you get FM. And so it's sawtooth FM, which is interesting. And because it's not a linear current source, it does some interesting things because it's an exponential sawtooth. And so you get all sorts of interesting sidebands and et cetera, which takes you then deep into the maths behind these things. And so I read up on things like Bessel functions and so on. That's one of the things. I also played around with the same idea, but with neon bulbs. If you have a neon bulb, you can use that in exactly the same way as a way of charging up a capacitor and then discharging it when it gets to a certain voltage. So in the days when you had batteries designed for valve equipment, so you'd have a 90-volt battery or something and a neon indicator stolen from a piece of mains equipment, and you can use those. And so I was making free-running oscillators that ran at nasty voltages, but they're really cool because you actually see when the reset has happened because the neon lights up momentarily.
Sure.
And so you get these wonderful arrays of flashing lights, and the flashing lights are actually the resets. So there's no intermediary in between. The flash that you see is actually the capacitor being reset to zero and then starting to rise up again. And so so this is seeing a sawtooth.
Oh my goodness.
So those are really cool. But of course, these days, high voltages and things you don't play around with. So that's where it all started. And so I did various projects like that. So, for instance, when I was, let's see, how old was I? I was about 11 or 12, something like that. And I took one of my analog modulars, which was all patched together with 4mm banana plugs. And that was shown at a science fair in the nearest big city. And there was another project that another couple of guys had done where they'd done an electronic music device as well. And so because the science fair was held at Liverpool University, then the music department there said that on one of the afternoons we could go along and see the department. And so myself and these other two guys went along and they showed us around the music department, and they showed us their pride and joy, which was an EMS VCS3. Mm-hmm. And so me and these other two guys spent a couple of hours playing around with a VCS3. And so that was one of my first introductions to the commercial side of things. It was also an introduction to the commercial side of things because those two guys went on to become orchestral maneuvers in the dark. So yes, quite an interesting thing. So that was when we were all very young and a long, long time ago. Right. So yes. After that, I did electronics at university, and that was interesting because that exposes you to all sorts of things. So I did various projects there. So one of the things I did was an analog sequencer. And so how do you do an analog sequencer in a world where The only sort of things that are digital are large mainframes computers that have either punched paper tape or punched cards that actually control them. So if that's your digital stuff, what do you do if you want to make a sequencer? And how do you make a sequencer when you've only got analog stuff? And so me and another guy worked on making a sequencer that runs everything from very slow-moving sawtooths and comparators. And so that's an alternative way of doing your timing. And that is one of the things that I reused in one of my owl pedal projects, which is when I did in Gen Tilde, I did the 4-step sequencer, and that uses exactly the same timing technique. You have a sawtooth, and you use that sawtooth as your timing counter, and you use essentially comparators to look at when it reaches particular points, and that's where you derive your timing from. And so yes, it's interesting how you can reuse the same ideas in a completely different technology. So there, it's all completely digital, no analog at all. But the method where you use a sawtooth as your timing element is exactly the same. After university, I did freelance electronics for a while. So I specialized in, what's the word? I'd say improving. Other people might say altering or destroying. So I used to tweak other people's synthesizers. So the Moog Satellite was a classic thing where you could pick those up reasonably easily because they were intended for sitting on top of Hammond organs and so on. In fact, some of them were dual named, so they had Moog's name and Hammond on. The problem they had was that the filter wasn't particularly sharply adjusted. And so what I used to do was go in and tweak the filtering so that the filtering sounded a little bit more interesting. Yes, changing capacitors and doing various things to try and make it so that a Moog Satellite has a more interesting sound was one of the things I did. And that led to working for the London Synthesizer Centre, which was a music shop that specialized in getting synthesizers from, I would say, around the world, but that actually translated mostly from America, and then selling them to a clientele that was just learning about such things. And so I ended up founding the service department, which meant that I got to play with loads and loads of interesting things.
Sure.
And fixing a number of synthesizers and string machines and various other things like that. So yeah, some classic things like a Selena string machine where someone had a slight accident and somehow the front of all of the keys had been sheared off, presumably by scraping it on the side of a stage or something. Mm-hmm. And it's one of these things where you look at this and it's like a very, very bad visit to the dentist where all of the teeth are missing, and you think, oh dear. And so yes, that was quite an entertaining one. I also know how to make a CS80 go up in flames, which is quite entertaining. It's one of those things where people say, CS80 is a wonderful instrument, which it is. It's also very heavy, and there's a couple of interesting things about it that are not necessarily perfectly designed. So there is actually a very, very simple way without hacking it, just by knowing what you're doing, where you can cause smoke and stuff to billow out of a CS80. But I'm not going to go any more than that because that's one of those interesting insider things that
right. You don't want to start up some group of CS80 terrorists out there smoking everybody's big machine.
Exactly. Yes. I think it's best not to. So yes, there'll be a couple of people who will be nodding at this point, saying, "Oh yeah, I know what he's talking about." Yes.
So
Yes.
that really, it's interesting to think in terms of your background with electronics really being kind of a requirement in order for you to be able to interact with experimental sound play, because it was, you got started well before there was a lot of commercial stuff available. And so you need to kind of have the hacker mentality to do that stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things you don't talk about there is how you got the chops to be a writer, because as both a ghost writer or a reviewer, but as well as the creator of a book, I mean, you had to learn how to do some writing too. And which I guess writing goes back a little bit to what we were discussing before, which is this curiosity and this desire to not only find out stuff, but to present that information.
Yeah.
Where did that part of it come from?
I suspect that goes back all the way to secondary school, high school, as Americans would call it, when I used to do lots of writing of essays and things. So I used to like the writing of essays instead of what most people, their reaction to it was that they hated essays. I actually quite liked doing it. And so I've always written as well as soldered. So writing, soldering, playing, these are all different aspects of what I've always done. So yeah, each of those facets is a similar thing. So yeah, started out doing various reviews of things, and that led to some columns. So I did a column for Sound on Sound magazine, which was called Rustlings, and that was very much a precursor to the sort of thinking about the blog. Unfortunately, I stopped writing it, and someone else has now produced another blog with the same name, and so it's one of those things where, yes, through lack of care and feeding, the animal has left and is now under different ownership. So,
yeah, that's the thing about the web, man. If you don't nail down the acreage, somebody's going to swipe it from you.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm actually a little bit curious about this work with the London Synthesizer Center, because that's not something I'd heard or read about you.
All right.
And it sounds pretty fascinating, because the timing of it would have been at a pretty exciting time in British music and British synthesizer music, especially, right? What were the kinds of gear that you were seeing a lot of, and what was kind of the temperature of the time? I mean, what were the things that people were doing? What was drawing them into synths and using synthesizers for music? And from your perspective, what was the synths that most people really wanted to get their hands on?
At that time, Polymoog had just come out. You had the Polymoog keyboard, which was the slightly cheaper and cut down preset version. You had things like the Jupiter 4. So I remember that when the Nolans played at the Manchester Free Trade Hall, the Jupiter 4 stopped working, and I'm afraid that I'm the guy that fixed it. So that night, when the Nolans played, I was the reason that their Jupiter 4 was working, which was quite interesting. It's either good or bad depending on your point of view. The things that I liked at the time was things like the Oberheim 2 voice, the Oberheim 8 voice. So I did lots of demos of those, and the Korg PS 3200 and 3300. So I spent an interesting afternoon demoing that to Kate Bush, which was quite cool. And so that those were the sort of things. More down to earth, you had the SH-101 and some of the ones earlier to that, the previous slightly greeny grey era.
System
all of
100 stuff, yeah.
System 100 stuff, yeah. Not to be confused with the later ones where you got the grey ones and they went more modular, so the System 100 and the System 500 stuff. Right. So I can vividly remember the launch of the ARP Avatar guitar synthesizer, which was an ARP Odyssey with various bits and pieces put onto it to map a hex pickup and an A to D converter, so that you could actually drive the top line of your guitar to drive the ARP Odyssey. And the story there is that the launch of the ARP Odyssey in the UK happened in Manchester at the Piccadilly Hotel. The American demonstrator that was due to come and show the Avatar to the assembled audience didn't turn up. And so the head of the company handed me the guitar. No, not a particularly good guitar player. Handed me the guitar and said, "Go and demonstrate it." And so I actually did the launch of the ARP Avatar when I'm not a guitar player, but I know an Odyssey like the back of my hand. And so yes, I actually somehow struggled my way through doing that launch, which was interesting. I launched the Roland D50 in the UK. That was quite entertaining. So they had two people. There was myself doing the technical side and Nick Magnus doing the playing side. And so you had two keyboard players, one on either side of the stage. And so Nick would play something and I would then say what was actually going on inside the D50, which was quite an interesting way of doing it. So yes, I've always been very grateful to Roland for a wonderful experience there of launching an instrument where all you needed to do was play digital native dance, and you'd sold it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it was talk about candy for the kids, right? That was the preset that sold 10,000 keyboards.
Yeah, it's an interesting and difficult thing that I'm better technically than I am in playing in a lot of cases. And so some of the stuff I do is a compensation for the fact that there are limits to what I can get my fingers to do. And so very often a lot of the generative stuff I do is because I really can't be bothered to learn something to the level of precision that's required, and to do something where I keep doing it repetitively, but with variations, etc., etc. Right. And so I'm afraid that I'm one of these people where I'll do something a few times, but once it becomes repetitive, then what I'll do is I'll find a way of automating it so that I don't have to keep doing it.
Well, there you go. And that actually then does kind of explain a lot of your Max for Live devices, because so many of them are sort of like you do a little bit of forethought, but a lot of it is about variation generation, and it's generative, but not in the like I'm turning control over to the machine kind of a way, as much as it's like an augmentation of what you were already planning to do. Yeah.
And I think that's a much better way of doing generative stuff, rather than the thing where, yes, you press the green button and it generates something. Right. So there's an awful lot of people who do some very, very nice stuff where they'll analyze a whole plethora of music through hidden Markov models and convolution stuff and so on. What they then come out with is something where, yes, it produces melodies that sound like or melodies and accompaniment that sound like the sort of thing that a human being could do. But I think there you've gone too far down the machine does it all and you are just pressing a button. I'd much sooner make something that augments what you can do, that makes you think about new things, that gets you out of a rut, etc., etc. So yeah, all of my stuff tends to be things where it's designed to help you do things and give you ideas. So yeah, generate new musical ideas.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that happens too is when you're making the sort of like I'm going to set the system up thing, it really preferences the intellectual part of music making, and I think sometimes things can go missing when there's not the emotional, hands-on playing part of it that's tied to it. Even if you're not a good player, I mean, the Sex Pistols weren't very good players of anything, and you certainly got a visceral sense of how they felt, you know?
Yeah. Yes, conversely, I also like playing stuff. I'm very much a believer that you do need to have the human part into things, and so yes, mod wheels, pitch bend, and etc. and real timing rather than everything being heavily quantized are the sort of things that I do. And so yes, I'm still one of the dinosaurs who actually thinks that solos are something that does have a place in music. Although these days there's an awful lot of people where the solo is a dinosaur from the past. But yes, I still go for that sort of thing.
The solo's been replaced by the drop, I guess, right?
Yes.
So Martin, I'm curious now. What is it that is the bee in your bonnet? You've gotten an opportunity to play with and play around so many things over the course of your career. I mean, such that you can put out a book that sort of like touches on every part of music making. If people want a glimpse, they can go over to Amazon and just do the look inside on the book, and you'll see that you pretty much start with someone banging on a log and end up with FM synthesis and beyond, right? So you have a lot of experience across the board. I'm curious, what has got your attention now, and what are the things that really have you excited about music and music technology now?
Two things, really. The first one is the way that the DAW, the digital audio workstation, has become more than just an emulation of a multi-track recorder. It's become a framework in which you can generate music, and the synthesizer, the drum machine, all of those things, the effects unit, are essentially just modules that you can plug into the DAW. And so it's interesting the way that that's happened, and that a lot of people think that modular synthesizers are an end point, and actually I think that it's the DAW with loads of VSTs, loads of plugins, etc. So lots of Max for Live, all of those sort of things, instrument racks, all of those things that actually are an interesting way of turning it into a sort of a meta instrument, an instrument that's much larger than just any of the individual parts. So that's something that I followed a lot, and lots of my Max for Live stuff is along that route. The other thing that I've always been interested in breaking is the obsession that people have with the 2 VCO, VCF, 2 envelope synthesizer model. So the subtractive synthesizer, where we have a world that's full of subtractive synthesizers. I've always been much more interested in other methods of synthesis. In particular, I've always been very frustrated by the way that there are huge limits on what you can do with samples in comparison to what you can do with standard subtractive synthesis or FM or whatever. And so I spent a lot of time over the last 5 years or so looking at ways of working with samples in ways that let you use them much more as part of synthesis instead of just doing replay, because replaying samples is not particularly interesting. If I'm going to use the sample, I'd like to be able to do much more with it than that. And so lots of my thinking has gone into that sort of thing for quite a while now.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I have this sense that sampling is about to make a big comeback. And some of it is because of the things that we see companies like Electron doing. Some of it is the reemergence of the MPC, but a lot of it is having to do with the manipulations you can do in programs like Ableton Live as well, right? These things really are turning out to be sort of like playgrounds for sampled sound. And in a way that is much more than just, ripping vinyl and regurgitating it. So it does seem like an exciting time for experimentation in the sampling realm.
Yeah, so that's what I've been doing. So not at the NAMM that's just happened, and not the one before that, but in the January 2018 NAMM, I presented a paper at the AES conference that runs alongside NAMM on exactly this. And so it's a method of using samples inside a synthesis technique. So yeah, I've done lots of stuff on that.
Well, it's wild. Well, Martin, unfortunately, our time is up, and I feel like we've just started scratching the surface, but nevertheless, we also got a lot of gems of info. This is really interesting. For people who are interested in finding out more about your work and what you're digging into, what's the best place for them to go?
It's probably the blog, so that's blog.synthesizerwriter.com, as you said. And there's a new edition of the book that I've been working on for a while that's still some way from coming out, but that's something that I've done lots of revision and updating to reflect the way that the world of synthesis has changed over the last few years. So yes, it's that's something I'm working on at the moment. So
awesome. Well, Martin, with that, I am going to let you go and have the rest of your day. Thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll hopefully talk again soon.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Hey, many thanks to Martin for his great interview. This was a lot of fun having a chat with him and kind of getting to hear a little bit about the history of electronic music in London. It sounded pretty cool. I want to thank you, the listeners, for sticking with me. This has been continuing to be a fun ride. Sorry about last week and the missing episode. I got waylaid by some travel and just wasn't able to bring it home in time, so I decided I'd just let it slide until this week. We'll be back on full schedule. In fact, I have a bunch of people in line that are going to be pretty exciting to hear from. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. If you have any questions or comments, drop me a line, ddg@cycling74 or darwin.gross@gmail.com or ddg@20objects.com. Any of those will work. I look forward to hearing you, or if you want, you can also reach out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm all over the place. Drop me a line. Good to hear from you. Catch you next time around. Bye.